The spring storm tore across the Colorado plains with a ferocity that made even seasoned ranchers pause in awe. Rain came in sheets, thick and relentless, soaking the brown earth until the trails turned into ribbons of mud that clung to boots and horse hooves alike. Lightning fractured the sky, momentarily illuminating the horizon with stark, jagged lines. The wind shrieked like some ancient beast, rattling the shutters of the abandoned barns scattered across the range, whipping the sparse trees into frenzied dance. The plains, usually wide and calm, were suddenly hostile, a sea of water and wind that could swallow a person whole if they weren't careful. Clara Wells fought against the pull of the mud, each step a battle. Her horse had bolted hours ago, panicked by the storm, leaving her to stumble through the rain with only the heavy pack slung across her back. The leather straps cut into her shoulders, slick with rain and grit, and her hat offered little shelter as her dark hair plastered to her face. She was exhausted, cold to the bone, and yet she kept moving because somewhere out there, someone, needed her. Then she heard it. A scream, sharp and urgent, cutting through the roar of the wind. "Lila!" The voice was frantic, unmistakably human, and it sliced through the storm like a lifeline. Clara's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know the girl, not personally, but instinct forced her forward. Her boots sank deeper into the mud, sucking at her ankles and threatening to topple her with every step. She could barely see through the curtain of rain, but a small figure caught her eye. A child, no older than 8, flailing helplessly as a calf charged blindly toward her. Time slowed. Clara's mind raced. The calf's hooves pounded against the sodden earth, the sound loud even over the storm. She lunged, muscles straining, catching the girl just as the animal's hooves thundered mere inches away. A searing pain shot up her ankle as it twisted sharply on a hidden root, but she clenched her teeth and refused to release Lila. The girl's small body trembled against hers, soaked, shivering, eyes wide with terror. Lightning split the sky again, and in its brief illumination, another figure appeared. A man, tall and imposing, rifle in hand. Samuel Hart, known in the region as a quiet, solitary rancher, strode toward them, eyes narrowed in suspicion and fury. His presence radiated authority. Every line of his body seemed coiled, ready to spring. The rifle caught the light, glinting menacingly. "Step back," he barked, voice sharp and unyielding, carrying over the wind and rain. "I said, step back." Clara didn't move. Not yet. Her breath came in ragged gasps, blending with the storm's roar. "She's safe. I've got her," she shouted, voice trembling. Not from fear but from adrenaline and the icy bite of the storm. Mud ran in rivulets down her coat, mixing with her blood from a scraped forearm. Her hands ached, her legs trembled from exhaustion, but the girl's safety outweighed every pang of pain. Samuel froze, tension radiating off him like heat from a fire. Every instinct told him the stranger could be a threat, could hurt Lila, could take advantage of this chaos. Yet as he stepped closer, he noticed the mud-caked boots, the wet hair plastered to a determined face, the fierce grip on his niece. There was no malice here, only courage and desperation. And yet, the rifle remained raised, fingers taut on the trigger. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the churned-up plains in stark contrast, dark clouds swirling overhead, the muddy trail stretching into shadowy distance, and the 3 figures standing amid it all, frozen for a heartbeat that seemed to stretch into eternity. The storm's fury made every sound a cacophony. The pounding of hooves, the rush of water along the trail, the wind tearing through the trees, and the faint, terrified whimpers of Lila clinging to her rescuer. Clara shifted, trying to adjust the girl's weight. Pain lanced through her ankle again, sharp and insistent, but she gritted her teeth, forcing herself to stay upright. "You can lower the rifle," she said, voice steadier now, carrying a hint of authority born from the moment's necessity. "She's fine. I won't let anything happen to her." Samuel's eyes narrowed. The wind tugged at his coat and whipped through his hair. Every muscle in his body was poised for action, trained by years of handling threats both human and natural. He studied Clara, trying to read her intentions through the rain-soaked exterior. Part of him wanted to demand she leave, to send her away from his land, his life, and most importantly, his niece. But another part, an instinct he hadn't felt in years, held him in place. Something about her bravery, her refusal to be intimidated even by his rifle, unsettled him. The calf, momentarily confused by the human chaos, veered off, finally trotting away into the muddy expanse, leaving behind a churned path and the scent of wet earth and livestock. Lila clung to Clara's neck, tears mixing with rain, her small body shaking. Clara whispered soothing words, even as her own teeth chattered, trying to keep the girl calm, trying to keep herself upright. Samuel lowered the rifle slightly, though he did not take his eyes off her. "Who are you?" he asked, voice still guarded, still wary. The wind ripped through the plains, carrying the distant rumble of thunder, and for a moment, neither moved. The storm raged around them, relentless, as if the world itself held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Clara finally managed a weak smile, muddy and exhausted. "Someone who couldn't just walk away," she said. And in that instant, though the storm was far from over, something fragile and unspoken began to stir. An uneasy truce born of survival, courage, and necessity. The plains stretched endlessly around them, waterlogged and treacherous, the sky dark and angry. Yet within that small circle of mud, rain, and danger, two strangers and one frightened child had collided. Fate, it seemed, had chosen its own path, leaving Samuel Hart with a choice he hadn't anticipated and Clara Wells with a chance she hadn't expected. The storm might not yet have passed, but neither could deny the electricity of the moment. Not just in the sky above, but between them, charged with danger, tension, and the faintest glimmer of trust. Samuel Hart stood on the high bluff overlooking his land, the early morning sun just beginning to pierce the remnants of the spring storm. The Colorado plains stretched endlessly in every direction, a tapestry of brown and green, mud tracks from the storm still visible where the rain had cut gullies into the earth. To the casual observer, it might have seemed serene, but those who knew Samuel understood that beauty hid a man hardened by loss, solitude, and the ghosts of choices long past. He had not always been a man of silence. Once, his laughter had filled the corridors of a small, creaking farmhouse back east. Once, he had known love that made the heart soar and the stomach twist with anticipation. But war had a way of taking more than land or freedom. It took pieces of the soul, leaving behind scars both visible and invisible. Samuel's right shoulder bore the marks of a musket ball that never fully healed, a constant reminder of a battle where he had survived when friends had not. The physical pain was manageable, but the emotional echoes, visions of fallen comrades, nights haunted by screams in the distance, had carved a permanent hollowness within him. After returning home, hoping to rebuild a life with Clara's namesake, the woman he had loved and once trusted implicitly, he found only emptiness. Marriage, which should have been a sanctuary, had become a battleground of miscommunication, disappointment, and unhealed wounds. His wife, unable to bear the man shaped by war, walked away with a finality that left Samuel questioning not only her absence but his own worth. He closed himself off, walling his heart behind fences as impenetrable as the ones he built to contain his cattle. He turned back to the cabin on the ranch, a modest structure weathered by years of sun, wind, and occasional storms, much like himself. It had been his sanctuary for decades, a place where he and his young niece, Lila, had forged a life together after her parents died in a wagon accident. Raising a child in the middle of the plains was no easy feat, especially for a man of few words and even fewer social ties. But Lila's laughter, bright and untamed, became the only melody that broke the silence of the ranch. She was his anchor, his reason to continue through bitter winters and scorching summers, and the one living soul who could penetrate the walls he had built around his heart. Every morning, Samuel's day began before dawn. He rose with the sun, tending to the animals with meticulous care. Horses needed feeding, cattle needed inspection, fences needed mending after every storm. He worked with the precision of a man who had learned early that neglect could be fatal, either to the land or to life itself. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen death up close and learned that survival depended on preparation, patience, and relentless effort. Yet despite the routine, a part of him always lingered in memory. He recalled the first time he had held Lila, her tiny fists curling around his fingers as he whispered promises he didn't yet know how to keep. Those moments were bittersweet, joy tinged with the pain of what had been lost, a reminder of love in a world that had shown him very little mercy. He had vowed to protect her, to raise her in the way his own childhood had lacked, and to ensure she never felt the profound loneliness that had shadowed him for so many years. Samuel's life had been governed by control over his land, his work, his emotions, and the unpredictable elements that define the plains. He had few friends, fewer confidants, and no one with whom he could share the burdens that weighed on him. Trust was a commodity he rationed carefully, and kindness, though present in small measures, was a cautious offering. Strangers were met with polite suspicion. They were potential threats to the equilibrium he had carved out in a world that had once proven ruthless. Yet, even in his solitude, Samuel was not unobservant. He noticed the smallest changes in the behavior of animals, the subtle shifts in weather, the way a shadow moved across the plains. These skills, honed by years of living in isolation, allowed him to anticipate danger long before it arrived. He was a man shaped by experience, tempered by hardship, and fortified by the necessity of survival. He remembered the early days after Lila's parents died, nights spent rocking her to sleep while whispering assurances he barely believed himself. Those nights had taught him patience, resilience, and a form of unconditional love that was foreign yet comforting. He had learned to anticipate the needs of another human being, to act before words were necessary, and to carry responsibility that extended beyond his own survival. Samuel's connection to the land was deeper than necessity. It was almost spiritual. Every sunrise brought with it both labor and reflection. He felt the heartbeat of the plains under his boots, sensed the rhythm of rain against the earth, and respected the storms that could either nourish or destroy. In many ways, the land mirrored his own life. Harsh, unforgiving, but capable of renewal when tended with care and intention. Despite the isolation, he had not become a man without compassion. He cared deeply for Lila, for his livestock, and for the integrity of his ranch. But that compassion was measured, restrained, and carefully guarded. He had learned the hard way that vulnerability could lead to betrayal, and he had little tolerance for the reckless, the unprepared, or the dishonest. In those quiet moments before dawn, standing on the bluff, Samuel allowed himself to acknowledge the faintest trace of longing. He did not name it, did not give it form, but it existed, a silent echo of the life he might have had, the companionship he might have found, the love he might have allowed himself to experience. For now, it remained locked away, a private yearning that neither time nor circumstance could fully extinguish. It was in this quiet, tempered by years of solitude and shaped by hardship, that Samuel Hart lived, a man whose exterior toughness masked a depth of feeling reserved for the few who truly mattered. His life had been carefully constructed, measured in days of labor and nights of reflection. He had no plans to change, no desire to invite chaos or strangers into his meticulously ordered world. And yet, even the most steadfast hearts can be swayed by the unforeseen, by moments that demand courage not only in action but in emotion. As he returned to the cabin, Samuel did not yet know that such a moment had arrived. The storm outside had passed for now, but another, quieter, stranger, and infinitely more disruptive, was approaching, ready to challenge every boundary he had ever drawn. The morning after the storm left the plains glistening with puddles and churned mud. Clara Wells stumbled along a trail she barely recognized. Her boots were soaked, her coat caked with mud, and the pack slung across her shoulders felt impossibly heavy. She had been walking for hours, maybe even a full day. She had lost track of time. The rain had driven her horse away, and she had no food left, no shelter in sight, and no one to turn to. Every step was a battle against fatigue, hunger, and the cold that seeped deep into her bones. Clara had been alone for months, drifting from town to town, trying to scrape together work wherever she could find it. Every job had come with strings, every roof offered with suspicion, and every hand extended had a hidden cost. She had learned quickly that kindness was rare, and survival meant moving forward even when the world seemed determined to push her back. But despite everything, something inside her refused to yield entirely. She had an instinct for danger, yes, but she also had an instinct for responsibility. She would not walk away when someone else needed her. That instinct made her freeze when she heard it again. A faint scream, carried and distorted by the wind but unmistakable. It was a child's voice, fragile and frightened. Clara's heart jumped into her throat. Without thinking, she ran toward the sound, boots squelching in mud, arms heavy from the soaked pack. She stumbled over a fallen branch, cursing under her breath, but the scream grew louder, more urgent, more desperate, propelling her forward faster than exhaustion should have allowed. When she reached the edge of a clearing, she saw them. A small girl, no older than 8, clinging to a man's leg as a calf stomped furiously nearby. The man's hands were tense on a rifle, his eyes sharp and unflinching, scanning her with suspicion. Clara didn't hesitate. She sprinted into the muddy field, heart hammering, and dove to scoop up the child before the calf could strike again. The calf veered just in time, but Clara's ankle rolled on the slick ground, sharp pain shooting up her leg. She bit back a cry, focusing entirely on the girl who clung to her with shaking arms. "Hold still, sweetie. I've got you," Clara whispered, brushing mud from the girl's rain-soaked hair. Lila's eyes, wide with fear, stared up at her, searching for reassurance. Clara smiled despite the cold and pain, and the girl's small grip tightened slightly in response. The man, Samuel Hart, took a cautious step forward, rifle lowering fractionally, though his posture remained rigid. His voice cut through the wind, calm but sharp. "Who are you?" Clara looked up at him, chest heaving. Her clothes were plastered to her skin, her hair a dripping mess, mud smeared across her face, but her gaze met his steadily. "Someone who couldn't just stand by," she said, her voice firm despite the shiver running down her spine. "She's safe. She's okay now." Samuel's eyes narrowed. Every instinct in his body screamed that strangers were dangerous. He had learned the hard way that the plains were merciless, that kindness could be a trap, and that his niece's safety depended entirely on his vigilance. Yet, even as the rifle trembled slightly in his hands, he could not ignore the way Clara's hands held Lila with care, the way her eyes were fixed on the girl, assessing her needs, calculating every movement to protect rather than harm. Clara adjusted Lila on her hip, ignoring the throbbing in her ankle. She glanced at Samuel, noting his tension, the careful distance he kept, the weight of responsibility pressing on his shoulders. She understood, in that moment, that she had intruded into a life defined by caution, by rules built to protect against the harsh world beyond the fence lines. But she could not leave. She would not leave. "Please," Clara said softly, her voice nearly drowned by the wind. "I can help. I don't have anywhere to go, and I don't want to be a threat. She trailed off, unsure what words could justify her sudden appearance in this man's ordered world. "I just couldn't walk away." Samuel's gaze shifted to Lila, who now hid her face against Clara's shoulder, small fingers clutching mud-stained fabric. He felt the familiar pull of responsibility, the need to protect her at all costs, and yet, he also saw something that unsettled him. A courage he hadn't encountered in years, raw and untested, that refused to bow to fear. He studied Clara, noting the dirt streaked across her coat, the bleeding scrape on her arm, the soaked bundle she carried on her back. She was exhausted, probably starving, certainly vulnerable, and yet she had acted without hesitation. Her bravery, combined with an unspoken understanding of the dangers present, made her unpredictable, but in a way that sparked a strange, reluctant respect. For a long moment no one spoke. The wind howled across the plains, tugging at coats and hats, lifting leaves and branches in wild arcs. Even the calf, sensing the tension, had paused at a safe distance, nostrils flaring, ears swiveling. Finally, Samuel exhaled sharply, the tension in his shoulders easing fractionally. He gestured toward the edge of the clearing. "Follow me," he said, voice low, measured. "You can stay in the cabin. Only through the night. After that, we'll see." Clara nodded, careful not to let relief show too much on her face. She could handle the night. She could handle anything if it meant the child was safe, if it meant keeping herself alive a little longer. She adjusted her hold on Lila, who looked up at her with wide, trusting eyes, and together they followed Samuel across the slick, muddy ground toward the small, weathered cabin that would serve as their temporary refuge. Inside, the cabin smelled of damp wood and hay, familiar to Samuel, foreign to Clara. She set Lila down gently, brushing mud from her coat. "You'll be okay," Clara murmured. The girl's lips quivered, then she nodded, her small hand curling around Clara's finger. Samuel lingered in the doorway, rifle now resting at his side, eyes studying them both. Something unspoken passed in that moment. A quiet acknowledgement that danger had arrived, but not in the form he had expected. This stranger, muddy and soaked, carried neither malice nor weakness. She carried intention, courage, and a will to act, and he knew, reluctantly, that her presence would change the quiet rhythm of his carefully ordered life. The storm outside had left the plains battered and chaotic, but within the cabin, a different kind of storm was beginning. A storm of lives colliding, of unplanned choices, and of courage meeting caution head-on. Samuel had protected Lila for years, but now he faced a challenge he had never anticipated. Deciding whether to trust someone who had stepped into his life without warning, yet with undeniable resolve. Clara, mud-caked and shivering, glanced at him. She did not speak of gratitude, of fear, or of her own desperation. Instead, she simply offered a steady gaze, as if to say, "I am here. I am capable. I will not fail." And for the first time in years, Samuel Hart felt a flicker of uncertainty, and perhaps a flicker of hope. The cabin smelled of wet wood and hay, the faint scent of smoke from the previous night still clinging to the corners. Clara lowered Lila gently onto the worn wooden bench, brushing mud from her coat and shaking out her dripping hair. The girl's eyes were wide, brimming with fear, but they also carried a glimmer of trust, the fragile seed of safety that Clara knew she had to nurture. Samuel Hart stood near the door, rifle now resting against the wall, his eyes still sharp, scanning Clara as if she might vanish into the shadows at any moment. He had never been unguarded, and he had learned over the years that strangers, even those who seemed kind, often brought trouble. But now, watching the mud-streaked woman cradle his niece's trembling body, a reluctant thought crossed his mind. Perhaps not all strangers were dangerous. Clara knelt beside Lila, ignoring the ache in her twisted ankle. "Can you breathe, little one?" she asked softly, adjusting the girl's sodden scarf. Lila nodded, though a tear ran down her cheek. Clara whispered reassuring words, stroking the girl's damp hair. She could feel Samuel's gaze on her, a weight that was almost tangible. For a moment, neither spoke. The storm outside had passed, but the storm inside the cabin, inside Samuel's mind, was just beginning. "You shouldn't have risked yourself," Samuel said finally, voice low but firm, cutting through the quiet. "You could have been hurt, or worse." Clara looked up at him, meeting his eyes. "I couldn't leave her. I don't know you, but I couldn't leave her," she replied, voice steady despite the lingering tremor from adrenaline and cold. "She needed me, and I acted." Samuel's jaw tightened. His instincts screamed caution, but something in her words struck a chord he hadn't expected. He had spent years shielding Lila from the harshness of the world, and now this stranger, soaked and mud-caked, had stepped into the very heart of that world with courage and purpose. He didn't know whether to be grateful or angry. Clara moved with deliberate care, tending to Lila's scraped knee, washing mud from her hands with water she had drawn from the small basin near the door. Her hands were gentle, practiced, and Samuel found himself studying the way she worked, noting the attention to detail, the instinctive care. There was no hesitation, no fear in her movements, only purpose. Hours passed as Clara cleaned and dressed the child, applied a makeshift bandage, and found dry blankets from a musty corner. The small cabin, which had once felt silent and empty, now carried the sounds of whispered reassurance, careful laughter, and the occasional squeak of the old wooden floor. Samuel watched from the doorway, arms crossed, internal battle raging. He wanted to assert control, to maintain the order and safety he had painstakingly built, but he also recognized the necessity of accepting help when it arrived in such a timely, vital form. As evening fell, the temperature dropped, and Clara lit a small fire in the iron stove, smoke curling upward, filling the room with warmth. Lila huddled close to her, finally allowing herself to relax, her earlier fear dissipating in the steady rhythm of Clara's voice. Samuel remained near the door, yet he could not resist inching closer, drawn by the faint warmth emanating not only from the fire but from the quiet competence and calm determination that Clara exuded. A sudden noise outside, a branch snapping in the fading light, made Samuel's instincts flare immediately. He moved to the window, peering into the darkness, rifle in hand. Clara followed his gaze, but she did not flinch. "It's probably just the storm debris," she said softly. "The wind is still strong, and the plains are littered." Samuel nodded, lowering the rifle slightly but not entirely. "You underestimate how quickly trouble finds its way out here," he murmured, almost to himself. Clara met his eyes, unwavering. "And yet you let me stay," she said quietly. "You trusted me, at least a little, even though you don't know me." Samuel's lips pressed into a thin line. He had not meant it to be trust. It was more a cautious allowance, a temporary truce dictated by circumstance. But as he watched her tend to Lila, seeing the child's growing comfort and her own quiet resilience, he realized that trust, however small, might be necessary. Night deepened, shadows stretching across the cabin's walls. Clara gathered blankets for both herself and Lila, making a small bed near the stove. The girl's eyes drooped with exhaustion, the trauma of the storm and calf incident finally catching up to her. Clara whispered soothing words, tucking her in and brushing her hair back from her forehead. For the first time since the storm began, the cabin felt like a sanctuary. Samuel lingered near the doorway, silently acknowledging the scene before him. He had protected Lila for years, faced dangers both human and natural, and yet he had never encountered someone who stepped into a crisis with such instinctive care. Clara had acted without hesitation, without asking for permission, and had placed the child's safety above her own pain and exhaustion. That simple, unflinching act had set a chain of events into motion, events that Samuel could not yet predict, but that he knew would change his life. By the time Clara settled onto the small cot near the fire, her ankle aching sharply with every movement, Samuel finally spoke, his voice quiet, almost reflective. "You're not leaving in the morning," he said, more statement than question. Clara looked up at him, wary but accepting. She understood the meaning. The night was safe, but there was more to come. More tests, more challenges, more uncertainty. But she was ready. She had come into this man's world and acted when it mattered. She had proven herself, not with words, but with courage and action. Outside, the plains were silent under a blanket of night, the aftermath of the storm settling into an uneasy calm. Inside, the small cabin held warmth, quiet determination, and the first fragile threads of trust being woven between three lives that had collided in the chaos of wind, mud, and unexpected bravery. Samuel Hart had protected many things in his life: land, family, solitude. But now he faced the possibility that protection alone was not enough. Action, courage, and the willingness to accept help could be just as vital. And Clara Wells, mud-streaked and exhausted, lay beside a sleeping child, her thoughts quiet but focused. She had acted when it mattered most, and she would continue to act. Whatever storms came next, outside or within, she would face them head-on. The night deepened, fire crackling softly, shadows dancing across walls, and for the first time since the storm had begun, there was a fragile sense of peace. Not permanent, not guaranteed, but a peace born of action, courage, and the beginnings of a bond that neither Samuel nor Clara had anticipated, but one that could change the course of all their lives. The calm that had settled over the Hart Ranch in the wake of the storm was deceptive. The plains glimmered under a fragile spring sun, but the quiet was brittle, as if the wind itself had carried whispers of danger. Clara had spent the morning helping Samuel mend fences and check the livestock, her hands raw and blistered, yet steady. Lila trailed behind them, her small boots splashing through puddles, laughter returning cautiously to her voice. For a few hours it almost felt like normalcy, a fragile bubble where the storm had never been. But the world beyond the fence lines was relentless. By mid-afternoon, Samuel spotted a dust cloud rising along the main trail. He stiffened immediately, eyes narrowing. This land had taught him to read signs like others read words, and he recognized the pattern of deliberate intent in the movement. It was not the wind, nor wandering cattle. It was people. Men riding hard, kicking up the churned dirt, moving with a purpose that was unmistakable. Clara, noticing the shift in Samuel's posture, turned toward him. "Who's coming?" she asked, her voice low, sensing the tension in the air. "They're coming for you," Samuel replied grimly. "I can feel it. Trouble doesn't usually arrive with a dust cloud this large unless someone's determined to find it." Clara's stomach tightened. "For me?" Her voice wavered slightly, betraying the fear she had managed to keep at bay until now. "Why?" Samuel's jaw set. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he led her and Lila to the cabin, motioning for her to remain inside while he went to meet the approaching threat. "It doesn't matter why. What matters is protecting what's here. Stay with her," he said, nodding toward Lila, whose wide eyes followed him, sensing both the danger and the unspoken trust he placed in Clara. By the time Samuel reached the edge of the field, the riders were close enough that their voices carried over the muddy ground. 3 men, dressed in dusty coats and wide-brimmed hats, dismounted near the fence. One of them, the apparent leader, raised a hand, waving a piece of paper. "Hart," he called. "We've come for the girl's companion. She owes money. Debts that must be paid, or she comes with us." Samuel's hands tightened on the reins of his horse. He recognized the type immediately. Opportunists looking to exploit anyone vulnerable, the sort who had once preyed on his own family. The blood of past betrayals pulsed in his veins, sharpening his focus. "You're not taking anyone anywhere," he said evenly, though the growl in his chest betrayed the depth of his fury. The leader smirked. "That's cute, Hart, but you're not a lawman. You can't stop us. And she's got debts. Big debts. Pay up or—" He motioned to his companions, menacingly, and Clara, watching from the doorway, felt her heart pound. Clara's fear flared, but she did not hesitate. She stepped closer to Lila, instinctively shielding the child. "I'm not afraid of them," she said quietly, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her. "And I won't let them hurt us." Samuel glanced at her, noting the determination in her stance. She had acted once to save his niece, disregarding her own pain. Now, in the face of real danger, she stood firm, unwavering. His respect for her grew, but so did his anger at those who dared threaten what he had fought to protect. A tense silence stretched across the muddy field. The men shifted uneasily, sensing that Samuel Hart was not a man to be intimidated. He had faced threats before, and he had survived, hardened by solitude, experience, and an unshakable determination to defend what he held dear. "You've made a mistake," Samuel said slowly, voice low but dangerous. "Turn around, leave this land, and don't come back, or you'll regret it." The leader laughed, a sharp, cruel sound that cut through the tension. "We'll see, Hart. She owes and will collect." Samuel's eyes narrowed, calculating. He had to protect Clara, Lila, and the sanctity of his ranch. Strategy mattered. He rode forward, placing himself between the strangers and the cabin. "One more step, and it won't just be words," he warned. His hand hovered near his rifle, though the stance itself radiated control and readiness to act with precision. Inside, Clara held Lila's hand tightly, whispering reassurances while scanning the window. She could see Samuel's resolve, the unspoken communication between him and the land, and for a moment, she felt both fear and awe. This man, so quiet, so withdrawn, was a force when his family was threatened. The confrontation escalated. The men advanced, but Samuel's calm precision, his knowledge of the terrain, and his unyielding posture unnerved them. One misstep, a miscalculation in the slick mud, a sudden movement, and the balance of power could shift. Samuel anticipated every move, forcing them to hesitate, to reconsider. Clara, observing from the cabin, realized that survival in this world was not just about courage. It was about timing, awareness, and the willingness to act decisively. Samuel was teaching her, without words, how strength was measured not by aggression alone but by control and forethought. The standoff stretched on, tension tightening like a bowstring. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the plains, the air thick with anticipation and the lingering scent of wet earth. Finally, Samuel spoke again, voice like iron. "Leave now or you will regret it. This is your only warning." The leader hesitated, calculating risk. The mud, the terrain, the unshakable presence of Samuel Hart, and perhaps the awareness that this was no ordinary woman and child, made him reconsider. With a final, disdainful glare, he barked orders to his companions, and the men reluctantly withdrew, dust clouds rising as they mounted their horses and retreated down the trail. Clara exhaled sharply, tension flooding from her body, but her hands still clutched Lila's tightly. The girl looked up at her, eyes wide with a mixture of awe and relief. "Are they gone?" she asked softly. "Yes, they're gone," Clara replied, brushing a strand of wet hair from Lila's face. "You're safe now, I promise." Samuel returned to the cabin. Mud splattered on his boots, his face set in grim lines. He nodded at Clara, a quiet acknowledgement passing between them. "You did well," he said simply. "You stayed calm. You protected her." Clara's lips pressed into a thin line. "We did what we had to do," she said, though inside, adrenaline still coursed through her veins. She realized that life on this ranch, under Samuel Hart's protection, was not just a matter of shelter. It was a matter of constant vigilance, courage, and facing threats head-on. For the first time since she had arrived, Clara understood the depth of danger that could reach them even in the seemingly endless open plains. And she understood, too, that Samuel Hart was not merely a man of routine and isolation. He was a protector, fierce and unyielding, and now, unexpectedly, an ally in the fight for survival. The day faded into evening, and the small cabin, battered by wind, mud, and the memory of danger, settled into a tense quiet. Clara, Lila, and Samuel had weathered the storm together, both the literal one and the threat that had arrived on horseback. And though the plains outside were calm once more, the knowledge remained. Danger could return at any moment, and their fragile bond would be tested again. Inside, they lit a small fire, the warmth filling the cabin. Samuel's eyes lingered on Clara, a mixture of respect and caution. The world outside was dangerous, unpredictable, and relentless. But for now, inside the small, mud-streaked cabin, 3 lives had survived together, bound by courage, action, and the beginnings of trust. The morning after the confrontation, the plains were deceptively calm. Sunlight glinted off wet grass, casting long shadows across the Hart Ranch, and the world seemed to breathe again after the tension of the previous days. Yet inside the small cabin, the quiet was tentative, a fragile pause before the next movement of life could take place. Clara stirred early, rising before Lila to tend to the fire and prepare a small breakfast with what little food remained. Samuel watched her from the doorway, arms crossed over his chest. The events of the previous day had left him unsettled, yet profoundly aware that his perception of the world, and of the stranger who had stepped into it, was shifting. Clara had acted with courage, with clarity, and with unwavering care for Lila. He had witnessed firsthand the instincts that made her exceptional, and he could no longer dismiss her as merely a transient presence on his land. The quiet was broken by a familiar sound, the distant rumble of hooves, approaching faster than casual travel would allow. Samuel's eyes narrowed, muscles tensing. The men from yesterday were returning, or perhaps new trouble had arrived. Clara noticed his shift in posture immediately and placed a reassuring hand on Lila's shoulder. "It's okay," she whispered. "Whatever comes, we'll handle it." By the time Samuel reached the threshold of the cabin, 3 figures dismounted near the fence. One carried a ledger, the other 2 flanked him, faces set in determined lines. Samuel's heart sank slightly as recognition struck. The men were not merely opportunists, they were the enforcers of fraudulent claims against Clara. The debts they cited were fabricated, designed to trap her and take advantage of her vulnerability. The leader, a man with a coarse voice and sharp eyes, waved the ledger. "Hart, she owes. We've come for payment," he barked. "Hand her over or we'll take her by force." Samuel stepped forward, his presence commanding. "She owes nothing," he said firmly. "These claims are false and you know it. Leave now or face consequences you'll regret." The man's eyes flickered with uncertainty. "That's not your concern," he said, though the confidence in his voice wavered. The law doesn't apply here," Samuel interrupted, voice low and unyielding. "Not when the law is being manipulated to harm the innocent. Step aside." His hand rested near his rifle, but it was his stance, his unwavering authority, that truly spoke. Clara, observing from the cabin doorway, felt a surge of relief and admiration. Samuel's control over the situation was absolute. The confrontation was tense but brief. Samuel's reputation, combined with the clear evidence of the fraudulent claims, left the men with little room to maneuver. They muttered threats and warnings, but eventually, they withdrew, dust clouds rising behind them as they left the ranch behind. The danger had passed, not through violence alone, but through courage, foresight, and the undeniable strength of Samuel's resolve. Inside the cabin, Clara exhaled, the weight of fear lifting slightly. She turned to Samuel, her voice soft. "They can't come back, can they?" "They can try," Samuel replied, though his tone carried a quiet confidence. "But they won't succeed. Not here. Not while I'm standing." He paused, letting the truth sink in. "You've been through enough. No one else will control your life." Clara's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, gratitude mingling with lingering tension. "Thank you," she whispered, though she knew that words alone could never convey the depth of relief she felt. Lila, sensing the shift, stepped closer to Samuel and then to Clara, a small smile breaking through her cautious demeanor. "Mama Clara?" she asked tentatively, the words almost a question, almost a declaration. Clara's lips curved into a gentle smile. "Yes, Lila. Mama Clara." She knelt, wrapping the girl in a warm embrace. Samuel watched, a rare, small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. The bond that had begun in the chaos of the storm was now solidifying, a fragile but undeniable family forming through courage, trust, and shared experience. Days passed, and the ranch settled into a new rhythm. Clara worked alongside Samuel, tending the animals, repairing fences, and teaching Lila small lessons about the land and survival. Each day, trust deepened, unspoken communication growing between Samuel and Clara as they coordinated tasks, handled challenges, and shared quiet moments in the glow of evening fires. One evening, under a lone mesquite tree that had weathered countless storms, Samuel approached Clara with a small, rough silver ring. The metal was scratched and imperfect, yet it carried a weight of meaning. He offered it to her with quiet dignity. "This isn't just a token," he said. "It's a choice. Stay with me. Stay with Lila. Build a life here together. I can't promise it'll be easy, but I can promise it'll be ours." Clara accepted the ring, understanding that it symbolized not rescue, not obligation, but a shared commitment. Her life had been overturned by circumstance, yet in this gesture, she saw the possibility of a family, of stability, and of love that had never seemed attainable before. The storm had passed, Not only the literal tempest that had battered the plains, but the trials that had tested courage, integrity, and trust. In its wake, 3 lives had intertwined, bound not by blood but by heart. Samuel had found a companion capable of bravery and care. Clara had found a home and a family, and Lila had found the security and love she needed to flourish. Night fell softly over the ranch, the plains bathed in silver moonlight. Clara, Samuel, and Lila sat together on the porch, the small cabin behind them glowing warmly. Conversations were light, punctuated by laughter and the occasional teasing remark. The world outside remained unpredictable, full of dangers both seen and unseen. But inside their small sanctuary, they had found stability, trust, and the quiet joy of belonging. The bond forged through storms, fear, and courage had endured. Samuel Hart, once a man of walls and solitude, had opened his life to another. Clara Wells, once a wanderer with nothing, had found a place to belong. And Lila, their bright, resilient child, had discovered the warmth of a family bound by choice, loyalty, and love. The plains were quiet, yet alive with the promise of spring. The ranch thrived, the animals healthy, the fences mended. And in the hearts of those who had survived the storms, both outside and within, hope blossomed like wildflowers across the Colorado soil, resilient, steadfast, and infinitely beautiful. Spring had fully arrived on the Colorado plains, and with it came a gentle renewal. The sun rose earlier, golden light spilling across fields that were once scarred with mud and churned earth from the last storm. The air was crisp but carried the subtle warmth of early mornings that promised long, bright days. The Hart Ranch, which had weathered chaos, conflict, and fear, now hummed with the quiet rhythms of life reclaimed and renewed. Clara rose before dawn, as she had learned to do in these past weeks, her movements quiet and deliberate. She wrapped herself in a worn shawl and stepped onto the porch, inhaling the scent of fresh grass and wet earth. Birds chirped softly, perched in the budding branches of trees that had survived storms, just as they had. For the first time in months, she felt a deep sense of belonging, not as a transient visitor, but as someone rooted, someone necessary, someone part of a living whole. Inside, the cabin stirred with life. Samuel moved with the same steady precision he had always possessed, tending to chores that required his care and attention. Filling water troughs, checking the horses, mending fences that bore the small scars of winter. His movements were efficient, economical, yet there was an ease in his shoulders that had not been present before. Clara noticed it often, the way he carried himself now with less tension, less wariness. Something had changed. Someone had entered his life in a way that unsettled yet strengthened him. Lila ran through the yard, small hands brushing against the rough surfaces of freshly planted garden beds. She called out, her laughter bright and unrestrained, "Mama Clara, come see." Clara followed, smiling as the child proudly pointed to a small row of green shoots poking from the soil. They had planted them together, day by day, nurturing life into a patch of earth that reflected the care and dedication now thriving within their small family. Samuel observed them from a distance, leaning against the post of the barn. There was pride in his gaze, quiet and unspoken, the kind of pride that comes not from conquest or achievement but from survival, from witnessing growth, from knowing that what had been nurtured was real and enduring. Clara had proven herself time and again, and now he could see the tangible results of their efforts. Not only in the garden or the mended fences but in the bond between them, in Lila's laughter, in the subtle warmth that threaded through their home. The day stretched lazily across the plains. Meals were simple but shared with intention, conversations meandering from practical matters to laughter, stories, and gentle teasing. Clara and Samuel moved through the routines of ranch life side by side, not as strangers navigating necessity, but as partners in the truest sense, equal, complementary, and united by shared responsibility. Lila followed them closely, her small voice chiming in with questions and commentary, her hands often smudged with soil or paint from small projects she insisted on undertaking. Evenings became the time for quiet reflection. By the fire in the cabin, Clara would sit with Lila on her lap while Samuel repaired tools or read from an old, dog-eared book. Sometimes they spoke in hushed tones about the past, acknowledging the storms they had survived without dwelling on them. Sometimes they simply sat in silence, content with each other's presence, the fire crackling softly and shadows dancing across the walls. The comfort of routine, the simple joys of shared existence, carried a peace that neither could have imagined weeks before. Under the vast sky, stars stretched endlessly above the plains, glimmering like distant promises. One evening, after Lila had gone to bed, Samuel and Clara stepped outside together. The wind was soft, carrying the scent of grass, earth, and distant wildflowers. Samuel offered her his hand, and she took it, the gesture simple yet full of meaning. No words were needed. Their shared experiences had forged understanding, trust, and unspoken commitment. They walked slowly to the edge of the pasture, where a lone mesquite tree stood, its branches stretching wide as though embracing the horizon. Samuel paused, glancing at Clara and then at the childlike marks Lila had left in the dirt earlier. A series of tiny handprints and footprints that reminded them both of the fragility and beauty of life. "We've come far," he said softly, voice almost lost in the rustle of leaves. Clara nodded, leaning into him slightly. "Further than I ever imagined," she replied, her tone reflective but content. The past, with its uncertainty and struggle, felt distant now, tempered by the solid reality of the present. Together, they returned to the cabin, the small light in the window glowing warmly against the encroaching night. Lila slept peacefully, unaware of the complexities and dangers that had once threatened her world, now cocooned in a sense of safety and love. Clara kissed the girl's forehead, whispering a promise to always protect, nurture, and guide her. Samuel watched, silently acknowledging the unspoken agreement that their lives were now irrevocably intertwined. The storm had passed, and in its wake, something greater had taken root. The ranch was not just a place of work or survival, it was a home. Clara's journey had brought her here, to belonging, to family, to the quiet satisfaction of making a life with people who mattered. Samuel had opened his heart to companionship and love, discovering that courage and care could be mirrored in another. Lila thrived, a living testament to resilience and the power of nurture. As the night deepened, the plains lay still beneath a sky that seemed endless. The cabin glowed softly, the warmth of fire and home spilling into the darkness. Life moved with quiet purpose. The sound of animals settling, the gentle breathing of a child in sleep, the rhythmic heartbeat of a small family bound not by blood but by heart. Here, in the vastness of the Colorado plains, peace was not a fleeting promise but a living reality. The past storms, the threats, the uncertainty, they all belonged to yesterday. Today, tomorrow, and the days beyond belonged to them together. And for the first time, fully and without reservation, they allowed themselves to believe in that quiet hope. The prairie, once harsh and relentless, now felt warm and inviting. It carried the laughter of a child, the gentle companionship of love, and the steadfast presence of those who had chosen to protect and nurture one another. Under the endless sky, life continued, steady and serene, each day a testament to courage, trust, and the enduring power of family.